Thank you. All right. The position of Inspector General was established by ordinance in 2011 and serves as the Chief Ethics Enforcement Officer in the county. The Inspector General is an independent officer that can only be removed by a vote of 8 members of council and the approval of the county executive. Since Mr. Griffin is not serving in an interim capacity, his term would expire 5 years from the date of confirmation, April or May of 2020. This hearing process will proceed as the last one did. And assuming a motion to recommend approval or rejection has been made, council will vote on the recommendation at its next regular meeting. Clerk, would you please read the resolution into the record?
Resolution number 2015-0059, a resolution confirming the county executive's appointment of Mark D. Griffin upon his taking the oath of office as Inspector General of Cuyahoga County and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Council President, if I may clarify one statement. The term that is in front of you for the Inspector General actually runs through June 30th, 2016. It's an unexpired term because the seat was vacant by Byrd resigning and going to the clerk of court's office. So, and he's being appointed to, for the unexpired term.
You mentioned that to me earlier.
Yeah.
But, thank you. Mr. Griffin. Good afternoon and welcome to the County Council.
Good afternoon and thank you, Council President Brady. Thank you, councilpersons, and thank you, Judge Connolly, for your kind and gracious words. I'm Mark Griffin, and I hope to be the next Inspector General with your confirmation. And I hope to serve in that capacity because I believe it's a critically important role to our county and to the great strides that we've made. I'd like today to talk a little bit about my view of the Office of Inspector General, talk to you a little bit about my background and skills, with some illustrations as well as the substance. I'm sure that you've had a chance to look at my presentation already in my application, but hopefully I can provide a little bit more detail and some understanding of my skills that lead me to be here today. And for me to be here today is the end of a long journey, and it's a great honor. It's been my hope and my desire for many years to go into public service. And the last time I worked in government was 26 years ago when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. And I believe deeply in good government. I've been born and raised in Cleveland, and since I've lived here, the most important and dramatic change in government that we've had is the restructuring of county government and the creation of this council and the creation of the executive, and as part of that, the creation of the Inspector General. And I think as part of this dramatic change in government, we've seen great green shoots and progress in our county. We see it in our economic development, we see it in our housing, we see it at every level. And I think it's critical that good government continue. One part of that has been the creation by this county council of the Office of Inspector General. It's helped our community grow. It's helped restore trust in the county, and it's helped to make sure that we don't go back to business as usual. And the reason that I want to be here today and to take this job is so that we don't go back to business as usual. The Inspector General is critically important in that. This body created it by Ordinance 2011-19 and amended again in 2012-08 to fight waste, fraud, and abuse. And it was the waste, fraud, and abuse that undermined the confidence of our citizens in our government. It delayed our economic progress, and it put a damper on the tremendous progress that we see today. And since that time, I think we see increased public confidence and increased public progress. And so I'd like to take a moment to thank Naila Byrd, who helped create and implement the office, and Andrea Nelson Moore as well, because they had a very difficult task. They built from scratch a new office. They laid the foundations for that office. They hired and trained excellent staff, and they earned a reputation for tough-mindedness and integrity. And so I would like to build on that success, but build in my own way. And let me tell you a little bit about myself, because I think that for some of you, I've known you for many years, and for some, today is probably our first meeting. But born and raised in Cleveland, I come from a family of public servants where public service was not something that was looked down upon, but which was honored. My father and grandfather, one a Republican and the other a Democrat, both served this country and served this county. And it's been my experience that the vast majority of public servants are outstanding, honest, hardworking employees. And it's only the few that create a problem for the others. And one of the roles, I think, of the Inspector General is to go after those few who make it hard for everyone else. I am not a lifetime government employee. I am from the private sector, but throughout my career, I've had experiences that interface with the role of Inspector General and a watchdog on crime and give me some of the skills that I think will be useful in my new job. When I was in college, I went to the University of Pennsylvania and I was an economics and political science major. But as part of that, I studied managerial accounting, finance, and statistics in the Wharton School of Business. But of course, it's not all about academics, and you need to go and then put that into practice. And I think my first watchdog experience was actually as a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon and West Africa. And I served there as a community development volunteer, and my job was to do three things. One was to build small construction projects, the second was to provide health education, and the third was to organize economic development groups. And so one of the things that we did was we worked with women's groups in particular, because in the part of Cameroon where I worked, there was a tradition that the men controlled all the cash crops and the women controlled the food crops, so that all the cash went to the men. So one of the things that we did was we worked with women's groups to create a community field and then take the money to create a revolving fund so that they could pay for their school supplies, they could pay for medicines for their children, and then the money would be refunded. And so we spent a lot of time training them on accounting techniques and that sort of thing. So in one village in particular, after we'd had a great harvest, they had about $200 in the community chest. I got a call, or I should say a runner, because there was no call. So there was a problem. The men had taken all the money. So I went to the village, and I met with the village chief, who was called the Jaro. And I said to the Jaro, well, excuse me, what happened to the money? And he said, well, you know, Mark, we had to take it for safekeeping because, you know, the women just weren't capable of taking care of it. So don't worry about it. I have taken all the money, and I'm keeping it for them. And I shook my head, and I said, well, you know, I appreciate that, but we've spent a lot of time working with them on basic accounting. I'm really sure that they can do this. And by the way, if you don't give it back to them, I'm going to have to talk to the civilian authorities and the civilian police. So he kind of tugged at his beard a little bit, and he said, you know, I've reconsidered, and I think it might be possible that they could keep it safe as well. And so serving at a very small level as a watchdog, that was my first experience that taught several things. First of all, that power has to be watched. When people have an opportunity, they can take advantage of it. Secondly, I learned that while some people steal, others justify. And one of the things that we look at is people who take money or take advantage of their public position, and they have a reason, or at least they claim to have a reason. I think it's stealing, but they think it's justification. And the third is that sunlight is the best disinfectant. As an Inspector General, one of the critical pieces is to shine the lights on practices everywhere. So I left the Peace Corps after 2 years and went to the Kennedy School of Government. And as part of my desire to be here today, although this was in '89 and '91, and certainly I had no belief or understanding I'd be here, but I knew I wanted to do something in government. I began working on a master's in public policy, graduated with a master's in public policy, where I took graduate level accounting for government and nonprofits, and they taught us enough about accounting to be able to tell debits and credits. But they also, at the end of our 2 years of hard work, the dean at our commencement speech got up to say, tell us all the secret of Harvard's success. And he kind of lowered his voice and he said to those of us who were graduating, that here's what made a difference for Harvard, that their plan is to scour the entire world for the most talented people they could find, everywhere in America, everywhere in Latin America, Europe, Asia, wherever they could find the most talented people, they would bring them to Harvard. And then what they would do is take credit for all of their success after graduation. So that is Harvard's success. And I would say to you this lesson, which is that people make the difference. It's not about the name that's on a diploma, but it's about the people who go to a certain place. And thinking about the management and our government, it's really the people in my office of Inspector General, but also the people in government who will make a difference regardless of what the name is on the diploma. As a lifelong Clevelander, I knew I always wanted to come back to Cleveland. So I came back to Case Western Reserve Law School. I had the misfortune of graduating first in my class, and that led to a detour, a 20-year detour of working in private practice. And I've been very lucky in working in private practice while still trying to be publicly involved. Until I received this appointment, I served as the vice chair of the Ohio Ballot Board, an unpaid position, because I care about our city and I care about our state and I care about government. But I've been very lucky in working with great law firms and great people. I started my law practice at Honloger and Parks. I was named to the partnership, then left to pursue my own private practice. And then since then, I've worked for my own law firm, Thorman, Petrov, and Griffin, previously known as Thurman, Hardin, Levine. And I want to thank my law partners who are here today, Chris Thorman and Dan Petrov. We are very fortunate. We are very fortunate in another way that has taught me some lessons about how the Inspector General's office should run. We are lucky in that we get calls every day from people who want our services. And our practice is employment law. We represent employees who have been terminated for discriminatory reasons or far too often than we'd like to think because they're whistleblowers. And so we have a system of triage and investigation up front where we look at every single telephone call because that's our business. We can't survive without giving every call its due. But we ultimately reject 94 to 96% of the people who call us. And there are several points to be made about that. One is that every call and every report needs to be looked at. But that doesn't mean that every report needs to be followed up upon. And there is a judgment and a triage process that takes place because, first of all, we don't want to pursue any claims that aren't good. Secondly, we don't want to pursue claims that ultimately won't be good for the business. So it's our task to find the handful of cases every month that have merit, but also which have enough merit to be valuable. That we get cases from time to time where there may be a violation of the law, but the violation is $5 to $10 or an hour here or an hour there of time. And those cases we have to refer to the proper authorities or to a proper solution, but not necessarily use our resources ourselves. And so in thinking about the Inspector General's job, that is also the case, which is that every single complaint has to be looked at. But that doesn't mean that every single complaint has to be followed up, and there has to be a triage process to use the resources of taxpayers in the most efficient manner. And that's what I intend to do. As part of my law practice, I would say I spend probably about a third to 40% with cases that involve some form of whistleblower or retaliation claim. And I think in many ways that's similar to what the Inspector General does as well, following up on whistleblower complaints. And in our law practice, typically we have to also investigate the substance of the whistleblower complaint as well. I've learned a couple of things over the years in the practice of law. One is we typically litigate the cover-up, which is when there is a problem, the first thing that happens, if there really is a problem, is the wrongdoer starts to lie about it. And that's what then leads to the case. So in every case and in every situation for a complaint that we may hear here in this office, we'd want to know whether the manager or whether the contractor or anyone is telling the truth. Secondly, we can't accept the very first answer as true. Oftentimes, as we start to investigate, we get conclusory answers, and it's only after digging a little deeper that we find out, well, the conclusion may not be supported by the facts. And the last piece that I would say is that we've learned to follow the paper trail, or in these cases, the electronic trail. It's critically important to follow up on emails and documents and electronic data. And in this age of the internet, electronic documents live forever. I'd say a last piece, which is that inside tips are critical. We learn about things because people who are on the inside know about them. Let me just give you an example. We had a call from a human resources person a few years ago who told us that in their corporation, the boss would not hire anyone with a religious affiliation. We said, well, that doesn't make any sense. How can that be? And she said, no, it's true. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, the boss required the HR manager during an interview to go out to the parking lot and look at the car of the person being interviewed. And if there was any religious affiliation whatsoever, that person could not be hired. Didn't matter whether it was a fish or a Star of David, or even if it just said St. Ignatius or any other practice, that person could not be hired. And that's the sort of thing that you would never hear without a tip. So we rely in part upon not just what we look for, but also the tips that come to us. Well, so what kind of whistleblower cases do we do? We currently have cases involving the False Claims Act, which is a federal statute which prosecutes those who make fraudulent claims for money against the U.S. Treasury. We have claims before the Securities and Exchange Commission, the IRS. At this moment, we don't have anything in front of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Agency, but we typically do. It's part of our Sarbanes-Oxley cases that we brought in the past. And we have a national practice of, we are currently in Texas, Pennsylvania. I've done cases in California, Nevada, everywhere. And I want to give you a few examples of my background and experience to give you a sense of how we investigate wrongdoing and whistleblowing activity. And these are cases from our national practice, so you shouldn't assume that they're from any particular place. But one of my first whistleblower cases involved a pediatric cancer nurse, and she was in charge of making reports to U.S. News and World Reports of the number of cancer patients treated by a particular hospital somewhere in the United States. And so for 5 years, she had been adding up the numbers of cancer patients, and then she got a new boss. And the new boss said, no, that's okay, I'll take care of it. I'll send the report to U.S. News and Report, don't worry about it. About a month later, she said, well, I'd like to see the report. He said, well, I don't have it printed out yet. I'll get it to you. A few weeks went by. He said, yeah, I'm going to get it to you. She went by again. Finally, she went to his office and said, print it out to me. She found that the number of pediatric cancer patients had been tripled from what they were the year before in the data that she had given him. And she said, well, this can't be true. And it was only after going behind the data that it was determined that this doctor had reported as a pediatric cancer patient anyone who's under the age of 29 was a pediatric cancer patient. Now, you would think that no medical providers would lie about cancer treatment to children, but apparently they do. And my lesson for my practice as an inspector general is this, which is you have to look to the second level of data. Let me talk about a few more things and then move on to kind of my vision of how we can change the Inspector General's office in ways that are consistent with what they've already been doing. I have a few other examples, but let me just talk about a little bit about money laundering. I've also had the pleasure of representing Treasury agents in whistleblower complaints within the Treasury Department. And these are individuals who do very sophisticated money laundering cases involving European banks. Some of them involve terrorist financing, others real estate mortgage fraud. And they came to us because they were being asked to process their cases with the same speed of a routine bank fraud case, which is a much easier case to prosecute. And my understanding from that is that you can't have a cookie-cutter approach to managing the office itself. There are some high-profile cases that are simply going to take a longer period of time than others. And you have to be able to have a management approach that understands the differences between simple cases that can be referred quickly, whether it's to HR or to other departments, and those complicated cases where they really require more time. I think this Inspector General's office has made great strides, and I think that it's planted some seeds that I would like to see, which to some may look like it's a separate direction, but I think in each case there is, I think, consistency with what has already kind of started. In talking and meeting with people regarding the Inspector General's office, it's clear to me that the first task of Inspector General Byrd was to establish the office and to respond to the complaints as they came in. But as the office has developed, she had started to change. I think it's clear that change needs to continue, which is to move the office from a reactive agency to a proactive agency. So rather than simply responding constantly to those complaints that come in, although they have to be looked at, there should be, in addition to that, a piece of looking at things proactively. The role of the Inspector General is not so much as a litigant, which is it's not a partisan or an advocate on one side or another, but it's to look at the facts impartially as they come in. And in trying to think about what makes a great Inspector General's office, I took some time to look at the Inspector General's office around the country. And I'm trying to measure it against what we've been doing here in Cuyahoga County and understanding the differences. So, for example, in Miami-Dade, the Office of the Inspector General, in any typical year, handles about 586 complaints. Only about 8% of those in Miami-Dade lead to initiating inquiry in Miami-Dade. 10% of the matter is already under review. 43% are referred to other agencies. 26 require no further action. 8% are actually resolved by their hotline operator, and 5% were still being reviewed at the time of the issuance of the report. We're slightly higher than that in Ohio. The Ohio IG in 2004 had 363 complaints, and about 22% of those complaints led to investigations or cases. So in Miami-Dade, I think they're being a little bit more directive in how they are handling them, and at the state level, they're taking about 22% of complaints. Here in Cuyahoga County in 2014, there were, for a much smaller staff, and of course a much smaller caseload than what the entire state of Ohio gets, there were 141 complaints that led to 40 investigations, or about 28%. So, I think that there is an ability there to have some triage and to have an ability to look at cases as they come in and deal with them effectively. So in thinking about how the office should look, I think we'd like to see more proactive investigation. I think we'd like to look at contractors increasingly, because I think at the end of the day, the taxpayers want to know that they're getting their money's worth, and they want the Inspector General's office to be an effective use of government resources. I think you're going to see more prevention, and again, these are already starting in the office, and so I think some of these are just continuing. I think you'll see more training of contractors, advisory opinions to prevent violations, and a referral process with the internal auditor. We're having lunch next week on Tuesday. I'm looking forward to working with her closely. We don't want to be a super human resources department. That's not our goal. It hasn't been the goal. And we intend to prioritize fraud and abuse that costs money to the taxpayer. So that is a little bit about me. I've tried to abbreviate some of my comments today. But we look forward to, and I look forward to working with council going forward. Look forward to investigating every complaint fairly and impartially. And I want to come back to what I said at the beginning, which is I want to keep the momentum of this county going. And this council has done a tremendous job in moving us forward. And to the extent that I can play a role and the Inspector General's office can play a role, that is what I intend to do. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. I struck by the fact that, of course, you said you didn't want to be a super HR or something or other, and again, that has been one of the concerns or the idea that the fact that an employee may be engaging in what we used to call office politics, where they may try to hurt someone else's reputation, and that all they have to do is make a complaint to the IG to create a public record, even if it's determined to be not appropriate or there's not a problem there, is something that's bothered me a lot, over the course of over the last 4 years. And so I'm glad to hear that you're looking at moving in a different direction.
And President Brady, I think it'll be a matter of degree, which is I think that people have an expectation that if they call the IG's office that we will do something and that we have to do something. But that something may be referring it back to the manager, or that something may be referring it to HR, rather than necessarily launching an IG's investigation to something that could more properly be handled by the manager. I think if the IG gets involved too much, that undermines the authority of managers throughout the county. And I don't think that you will see a sea change, but I think that it will be a difference in emphasis and a difference in increment and direction.
I agree with your analysis that it undercuts management's ability to run their departments if someone is always going around them or undermining them or causing some kind of an investigation that may be unwarranted. So it's a tricky business. Questions by the committee. Councilman Gallagher.
Welcome, sir. I didn't put it together initially that you were Judge Griffith's son. So he's I worked in a court many years, and he's a kind and honorable man. And the recommendation of President Conley certainly goes a long way, although we disagree on the single shooter theory. And I'm not going to ask you your thoughts. I think I know where you're at. But when this was first proposed, and we had our initial discussions, and I've had this discussion many times with the previous Inspector General Byrd, what's the balance here? Where do we get balance in the Inspector General? And I always referred to it, unfortunately, of possibly creating a monster. And it could go wrong, and it could go wrong fast. And how do you stop the monster?
So let me say, first of all, I think that Inspector Byrd did a great job. And I think that she was impressive in her ability to call balls and strikes without any sort of influence. And I think in looking at how other Inspector General's offices try to strike that balance, there is no clear guide stone, but I would say this, which is that it seems to me in looking at their annual reports, there are a couple of things that push it to an IG position rather than an HR position. First is if there's more than one employee involved. So if it's a group of employees involved in some sort of fraudulent activity, it seemed to be that IGs were stepping in at that point. The second is if, in fact, there was monetary loss to the county, because then it goes beyond an issue of, I don't know, I wouldn't want to characterize it, but I think those are the two guide stones. But at the end of the day, I don't think that there is a clear delineation, and the way to, I think, avoid growth is communication. And so, my desire is to work closely with HR and work closely with the internal auditor so that the focus is where it should be and the balance should be where it should be.
My concern really is who does the Inspector General answer to? And right now, it's once you're in, you're in. And that was my concern. And I've had lengthy discussions with President Conley and Inspector Byrd, and she also agreed. She said, it's a good question. She goes, I don't know where that balance comes in, who the Inspector General answers to. I personally don't know that either. I'm just wondering, any thoughts on that?
Well, so some of this is the dilemma of creating an independent Inspector General, which is the thrust. I think one of the purposes is to have an Inspector General who has independent expertise and who can't necessarily be influenced by outside considerations. The Inspector General answers to this body twice a year, but I understand that that's not enough. And the Inspector General answers at least as a reporting function to the executive. So ultimately, though, I think the Inspector General has to answer to this body for reappointment, for budgeting, and answer in a more communicative respect with the departments that it works with.
It's a delicate balance, and I just don't know where we go with that, or if we do, because the independence of it is the single most important part of it. So the answering to someone else or another entity, I just don't know where to go with that, and it's the only discomfort that I had, and not necessarily with Ms. Bird or yourself. I'm just looking into the future potential, just a thought, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you. Councilwoman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on getting this far.
Thank you, Ms. Brown.
I just wanted to, when I was trying to get an understanding before I came on the council of the role of Inspector General, I too looked at different communities and cities to kind of figure out what the roles and responsibilities were. And so I'm curious as to why you landed on Miami-Dade.
Because in speaking with other members of council, there is a belief that Miami-Dade it was particularly successful. It seemed to have a reputation. I would say that Miami-Dade is different than Cuyahoga County because it's a consolidated government, and so it's dealing with metro functions that would be the projects of the city of Cleveland, for example, in Cuyahoga County or other municipalities. So I think that allows Miami-Dade to be able to quantify in dollars. They have projects and things under their domain that allow it to kind of put up big numbers of the dollars they've saved taxpayers, but that attracts attention. And because of its size, it has more programs and I think more kind of individual creativity and more successes than others. But that's the only reason. Simply that it's become kind of a prominent local Inspector General's office.
Okay. And then to kind of piggyback off of the numbers that you gave us, you said that they had 586, I guess, calls initiated to the Inspector General, and 8% led to investigations. And if that's true on the county level, you said that we had 363 and 22% led to investigations. And I wanted to verify the state number, 141 and 40 led to investigations.
Yeah, I'm sorry, those were reversed, and perhaps I misspoke. The 363 was the state number, and the 141 was the county number.
Okay. And I guess my question with those numbers, did you see a trend or types of cases that generally led to investigations that was a common thread in the three numbers that you gave us?
So they were different, and let me talk a little bit about the different ones. The Miami-Dade cases seem to be contractor fraud, construction fraud, in addition to abuse of power and abuse of process by employees. In the state of Ohio, and then I think as you work down through the size, that becomes more or less. So, and I've got some more numbers here that might be helpful. But so for the Ohio IG, there were increasingly more, I wouldn't call them HR, but abuse of power and abuse of process issues, and fewer contracting issues. And then that trend continued down to Cuyahoga County as well. Where I think we had fewer contract issues and more, even more, I'd call them HR or personnel issues than at the other two.
So one last question, if I may. Would those be the trends, if you will, that you will use to be proactive, if you will? How would you use your proactive approach given the trends that you've already seen?
Yeah, well, I think it's a matter of looking for things, and there are several issues. One is the increased scrutiny of the registration of contractors, the debarment process. But then one of the things that has been discussed is the ability to use data and big data in order to look for areas of fraud. And so this has been even more common at the Medicaid and Medicare level, where CMS has a set of standards and computerized target numbers or averages, and if they see something that's out of line, that throws up a red flag. So there's starting now to be among IGs a similar process of a set of standards and flags where you can look at receipts and contracts, and some of that software will also throw up those red flags, so you don't have to sit back and wait. Let me talk a little bit about, I wanted to get back to you with respect to the type of complaints investigated in Cuyahoga County. So last year, 25% were misuse of official position, 17% were misuse of county resources, 13% were time or attendance fraud, Another 13% were secondary employment issues, failure to file secondary employment forms, and 8% were failure to follow procedures. That does not add to 100%. There were a variety of smaller categories there as well that I didn't include in my list here today. But in answer to your question, I think that we want to look into the ability of software and data to scan our records to see if there might be anomalies that would lead to an investigation.
All right. Councilman Miller is next.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Griffin, congratulations on your nomination for this very, very important appointment. And first of all, I would say that the late Fannie M. Lewis used to say that the name of the game is politics and money. And where does the money come from? Contracts. And while I believe that the vast majority of our contractors are effective, honest, and do excellent work for the county, I do believe that that working with procurement and diversity, that contracting is an area where the Inspector General could have an expanded role effectively. So I'm glad that you're talking about that. Particularly with our distinguished first council president being here this afternoon, I would like to raise the issue that there's been some belief on the part of some that there's at least been a perception that the Inspector General has not been as independent of the executive as might be ideal. And my question is how do you see your relationship with the county executive and the administration, and what steps, if any, would you take to put forward a clear presentation of independence?
Sure. Let me thank you for that question. The first thing I will say to you is that only actions will prove the continued respect for the office. But the second thing I would say is I will follow the law. I'm leaving a great private practice to come here because I want to do the job, and I want to be the Inspector General, and I will tell you, and I have told the county executive, that I will follow up every complaint. And whether it's in the 94% or the 6%, every complaint will get the same scrutiny. I'm also, as a lawyer, bound by the Code of Professional Responsibility, which is I have to protect my client. And my client is the taxpayers. And throughout my 20 years of practice, I have always stood up for my clients, regardless of who that defendant may be. Conflicts of interest or claimed conflicts are nothing new, and lawyers, we deal with them all the time. I am a loyal alum of Case Western Reserve University, but I think actions may give you some guidance as to how I will act, which is we take cases on a regular basis involving Case Western Reserve. My wife and I both graduated from Case. We contribute money every year to Case. And when a client comes in and wants to sue Case Western Reserve, if they have a valid complaint, we take that case. And I'm pleased to say that I've had a number of very satisfied clients in that respect. So I think the past will tell you something about the future. I also, I think, have a reputation for not giving up easily. We recently resolved a case that was pending for 44 years against Penn Central. And my part of it was the last 10 years to finally get it done. Had another 10-year case involving CellNet. As a lawyer, if there is a complaint to be followed, I follow it and never stop. And I think my clients have been happy, and I think my new taxpayer clients will be happy as well. And I think at the end of the day, as someone who lives and loves Cleveland, the job's too important. And so what I say to you and what I say to everyone is, I will follow the law, and I will look at every complaint as I do in my own law practice and as I will do here.
All right. Councilman Schron and then Councilman Greenspan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're going to be switching almost your roles, flipping it upside down from where you currently are representing an individual to now representing, as you indicate, the taxpayer, the government, the people on the other side. There's also a possibility, it seems, as though your law firm could be representing somebody that would be taking a contrary position to what you as the Inspector General might have made a determination some point along the way. So you're going to be on the opposite side of your compatriots at some point out there. I don't know, just
sure. And so I'm resigning, and I will resign and sell back all of my shares. My wife and law partners think that I am crazy and out of my mind to do that, to follow public service. But I will no longer be affiliated with Thurman Petrov Griffin. They'll drop my name off of the letterhead, and we'll go forward from there.
No, I assume that was, yeah, because I had some people tell me I was crazy with what I was going to do, what I did last year too, and would have had to go some of those same sales and stock and all that.
Well, hopefully you can give me some advice then.
We don't lose.
Okay.
The comment about management being undercut. My background, as far as management, in relation to IG, was from my JAGCOR days and the IG, and they felt compelled, potentially, to go all the way up to the commanding general. And if it meant a management undercut, you don't get much more management undercut than going after the commanding general if you're associated with a base. How do you reconcile that comment I know was said as far as if management needs to be undercut regardless of what position it is in the county, whether it's up here, whether it's over there, whether it's where it happens to be? Is that even a legitimate worry as the Inspector General?
First of all, let me make sure I understand your question. You said that they would go all the way. Is that the employee or the Inspector General? Or
the Inspector General. I'm sorry, I apologize. Yeah, the Inspector General would go all the way potentially to investigate the commanding general without risk what it meant to management being undercut. How do you reconcile that concern, if any?
I think it depends on the nature of the case involved, which is if it's a routine HR issue, it's not something that ought to be high on the priority of the IG. But if it is something that involves reasonable amounts of taxpayer dollars or groups of employees, then absolutely it goes to the top.
Okay, because obviously that we're all sitting here because eventually management did get needed to be undercut from the previous and it needed to be investigated. But your other comment was that you will investigate every complaint. But what if there isn't a complaint and all you have available is that gut feel, whatever it is, whether it be a hiring issue, whether it be a contractor issue, whether it's maybe something that's written in the plain dealer or any other source of information, and you say that just doesn't pass the smell test, even though I don't have a complaint. What is your obligation as the IG?
The answer is it depends, and it depends on whether there's a basis for that gut feeling. And I think the resolution of that is you've got to be proportionate to what you think might be going on. So if it's a concern or an interest, then maybe you just request a few documents or talk to a few people and try to make that decision at that point. The other piece I would say is I think that we do want to be proactive. And so acquiring that information to be able to initiate reasonable investigations on our own, that's going to look at the documents, hopefully from either red flags thrown up by a computer or documents looking at overruns or that sort of thing.
That just naturally then brings up, do you think this office should have subpoena power?
The answer to that is, as I see it, as I've looked through the websites, it appears that every IG's office does have subpoena power. In my own private practice, I have subpoena power. Having said that, this is a new entity. And I think that the entity has to work with counsel first to get those subpoenas. And then I think, if that proves to be something that's useful. If it proves to be successful, then I think a decision should be made, in the next 2 years, 2 to 5 years, about whether or not there should be subpoena power. And I don't think it's a yes or no answer. I'm sorry. I don't think it's a all or nothing subpoena power for the Inspector General. So, for example, this council could decide to have limited subpoena power with particular topics or regarding particular areas of investigation and see how that goes before granting complete subpoena power to the Inspector General. I don't think it's a nothing or everything proposition.
Thank you.
For the interest of the council, every member of the council is very interested in asking you a question. And since at the time this began, I mean, literally almost everyone indicated to me almost simultaneously that they wanted to ask you a question. So for everybody who's waiting, you're definitely on the list. But, so now we'll go to Councilman Greenspan.
Great, thank you. And as somebody, I mean, I've been kind of quietly supporting the concept of the IG, so I appreciate my colleagues' indulgence there. Actually, this was one of the first things when we met at CSU the Monday after we won the elections. I started advocating for this position, and although I'm inspired that this council enacted the legislation, I don't think the IG office has gone far enough in some of its abilities and some of the authority that it has. It seems to me, and I've expressed my concern, that it's been too much focused on employees and ratting out employees who improperly use a swipe card or a parking card, and not focused on some of the meat that you talked about, insofar as the Miami-Dade IG, insofar as really trying to root out waste, fraud, and corruption. The corruption part of it, as it relates to employees, I think has been overexploited, but I believe there's a great opportunity. And when we talked last week, I believe that you share some of those same thoughts. One of the areas that I believe the IG has already the authority but has not yet implemented, and we talk about contractor evaluations, and I believe the IG could have a significant impact in evaluating contracts. Right now, our contracts by and large are negotiated, are put up for proposal, they're evaluated, then they're monitored, and then ultimately evaluated for performance by the same body. And to me, that is an inappropriate checks and balances. What are your thoughts on that, on the opportunity for the Inspector General to serve as an evaluator, if not your agency directly? Because I understand there are hundreds, if not thousands, of topics to which we're talking about that the county engages in, but the ability for the agency to contract out for those who have the specific skills to provide those evaluations.
And so let me make sure I understand. You're not talking about a report card for a particular contractor, but you're talking about compliance of a contractor with a specific contract and whether they provided the deliverables that they were obligated to do. Well,
yes to that, but also a little further in the sense that right now when we are reviewing contracts, there is effectively a report card or an evaluation that's done as to whether they met the objectives of the original contract. So if we're talking about the same thing, the answer is yes. If not, we're talking about making sure that the provisions of the agreements are being met.
I think that's something that I would be interested in. I have not given it a lot of thought at this point, but I think that falls within the general focus of trying to find activities that are of high value to taxpayers and maximizing the benefits to the taxpayers. And so that is something that I would like to look into once I take office.
Okay, and I'll defer my other comments, allow other colleagues to ask.
We appreciate that. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Jones. Well,
he missed his
lost his shot. Councilwoman Conwell.
Congratulations, Mr. Griffin, on getting to this point. What would you do if one of your employees in the office of the IG was being investigated?
I think that has to go to the law department, and I would recuse myself and ask someone appropriate from the law department, or depending on the nature of the complaint, the county prosecutor's office, to look into that.
Would that employee, fellow coworkers, know that they're being investigated?
It would have to be a case-by-case decision.
Okay. And there are differences of opinion regarding this office being within the charter. Do you feel this Office of IG should be in the charter? And if so, why?
I don't know yet, and I don't want to provide an opinion until I've had a chance to see how it functions, to see how it works. I would say this, which is I think that as it goes forward, and we'll have to see whether the independence is required in order to be in the charter or not. And so I don't know yet.
Okay. When you know, can you get back to me?
Absolutely.
All right. And now, Councilwoman Simon.
Okay. Thank you, and congratulations on the nomination, Mr. Griffin. Council is in the process of updating its ethics policy. Do you believe the Inspector General has a role in the crafting of the ethics policy of the county? And if so, what would that role be?
Yes and no. So first of all, the Inspector General is going to enforce the rules, period. And whatever this county council decides to write as the ethics ordinance, it's the obligation of the Inspector General to enforce it, and the Inspector General should have no opinion as to the writing of that. But I do think that the Inspector General has a role to provide in providing information. So what I see the role should be of working with council to give our thoughts without a conclusion, because the Inspector General should not be in a position where they have given a view and it doesn't turn out that way, and then there's some suspicion that the Inspector General is not enforcing that position effectively, or that portion effectively. So I think the role should be communication, provision of information, but the recommendation is going to be up to the council, and whatever this council decides, the Inspector General should enforce.
So are you talking about a substantive recommendation or more of a procedural recommendation?
Well, I guess I wouldn't call it a recommendation. I think I would say sharing with you the experiences of the office, sharing with you our understanding of the experiences of other offices to allow the county council to decide, as opposed to saying this language is better than that language.
Okay. In terms of your vision to be a more proactive office, would you then contemplate an adjustment of the budget or staffing levels to accomplish this goal?
We would have to look at that. Currently, we have basically 3 full-time investigators with pretty heavy caseloads, and the question will become whether we're able to triage some of these other activities in a way that frees up employee hours to do other things.
And when you're looking at contractors' compliance in whatever regard you so choose, in terms of whether the contract is being breached or not, or whether it's performing, the contractor performs well, when you consider the contracts that are entered into with the courts, how do you see the role of the Inspector General in respecting the separation of powers between the county government and the court proper to fulfill their role as a third independent body?
So there's an interaction there where the courts, of course, are the third arm, and they are an independent entity to themselves, and yet the budget is approved by county council. And so I think that there are some elements that the Inspector General can't touch. I mean, you certainly can't touch the salaries of judges or things like that. Those are statutory anyway. And so I guess I would tell you it would be on a item-by-item basis to see whether there are things. For example, the clerk of courts is an executive function, and that's been the subject of some discussion between the judges and the executive branch. And so I think we'd have to look at it and think about that. One of the interesting things about the Inspector General's budget is that over the years, actually, it's come down. In 2014, the budget was $877,000, and Inspector Byrd actually brought it in substantially under budget at $804,000. And for this coming year, it's $783,000. So I think the management of the office has been pretty efficient to date, and I think Inspector Byrd deserves quite a bit of credit for bringing that budget in under budget. and we have a lower budget to work with going forward. So we're going to have to prioritize whether the expansion of work deals with the judiciary, which I think will be a tough one, or other areas regarding contractors.
Okay. Councilman Germana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
I think universally when this council, got on board, one of the goals was, what do you want to accomplish? And I think universally what we wanted to do was restore the public trust in county government, because it was shattered. And in particular, the idea of how come no one blew the whistle? And of course there was because there was no protection and what went on. So as this is developed, we've got to a position where the Inspector General has these ethics programs for all employees and contractors and so on. It's my feeling that the Inspector General should help instill a culture of integrity in the operation, and in particular with all department heads and managers. So there should be a culture of integrity and ethics. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And in fact, if you read through the literature about successful inspectors general, one of the things that they point to is creating a culture of compliance. It seems to be the term in the literature. And they have different ways of doing it, and education is part of it. Holding people accountable is part of it. But holding people accountable at all levels is also an important part of that piece. And I think that people believe it when they see it, and they don't believe it until it's done. And I do think that tremendous strides were made under the previous Inspector General so that every employee, I think, understood that violations would be looked into and prosecuted as appropriately. So in terms of I think a change or a change in tone, I think the vast majority of what was done was absolutely correct. And I think that it's important to maintain that enforcement in those mid-level positions, in particular mid and upper level. And I think that can be done without necessarily getting to some of the smaller HR pieces.
I think you understand what I'm saying. Once you have the infraction, you're kind of reacting to it, and the point I was trying to make is if you're proactive, you're going to stop that possibility of happening. So,
and perhaps I misunderstood your question. I thought I was trying to be responsive.
No, I think you were exactly, and what I'm saying is.
Can I say one more thing? Because I think you raised a point that I'd like to talk about. I think there are a tremendous number of great managers, and I think, in my view, one of the best county managers who I've worked with is Jane Platten. She was at the Board of Elections, now she's over at the County Prosecutor's Office. And I think what made, in my view, Jane Platten a great administrator is if someone came to her with a problem, she would not get defensive about it. She'd say, I want to solve the problem. And as Inspector General, I don't expect to have every single tip that comes necessarily to my office. Some of those may come from the public. Some of them may come from, the media, from wherever. And so my goal when that happens, whether it's in the media or elsewhere, is not to say I'm going to get defensive about it because I don't think that's the case, but to say this is great. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. And so in reference to your question about will people be intimidated or deferred or discouraged from bringing tips, I hope not. And whether the tip comes to my office or anywhere else, our reaction will be, thank you for telling us, we're going to look at this.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to remind the council at this point that it's approximately 4:30. We have an executive committee to go into before the 5 o'clock council meeting, so I suppose we should be wrapping this up. Is there any further questions by the council? Any unreadiness to move forward with this appointment? Could I have a motion to recommend Resolution R 2015-0059 to the full council for second reading adoption under suspension of rules? Councilman Miller's moved and seconded by Councilman Strawn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion is carried. This will be on the council's April 28th agenda.
Thank you, President Brady. Thank you, councilpersons.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. All right, we need to move back now to item number 5. As usual, have to bear with me. All the meetings of the Cuyahoga County Council are open to the public under the Ohio open meeting laws. Under the law, council may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, council confers outside of the hearing of the public. Council may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All decisions are made in public. This afternoon, the council's committee of the whole will go into executive session to discuss collective bargaining matters. During this time, our live stream will be down, and we ask all those not specifically needed for the executive session to remain in the council chambers. Council members will convene in the adjacent committee room A and will re-enter the meeting once the executive session has ended. Could I have a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining issues? So moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Oh, I'm sorry. We have to do a roll call. Thank you, Councilman. That's right. We have to do a roll call on this.
Calling the roll to move to executive session. Ms. Conwell?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Hairston?
Yes.
Ms. Simon?
Yes.
Mr. Greenspan?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Germana?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Schron?
Yes.
Council President Brady?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, then we'll adjourn for the meeting of the executive session. Sorry.